Hey, Monica and Jill, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good, how are you?
Nice to see you. I
So,
love your snazzy background, by the way.
no, I'm actually in the sky. I am actually. So today is the VDF X Sight Unseen collaboration. So thank you to you guys for making that happen. Just introduce yourselves a little bit. Who are you? Where are you calling from? And what do you do?
Sure. I can go first. I am Monica, and I'm calling from my apartment in Park Slope, Brooklyn, New York, where I have been isolating myself for, gosh, I think it's been like 10 weeks now, 11 weeks. Basically just going out for walks. And I'm the co-founder of Sight Unseen with Jill. We started Sight Unseen in 2009. And before that, I was basically a journalist, a magazine editor. Jill?
I'm Jill Singer. I am Monica's co-founder. I am at my house in Long Island, where I've also been since like March 11th or something like that. So yeah, it's not so different for us because we always work from home, but
That's true.
will not.
Jill, you're also a journalist. Is your similar story to Monica?
Yeah, we worked at a magazine together called ID. It doesn't exist anymore, but we worked at a design magazine together for 4 years before we started Sight Unseen. And before that, I was just doing like media reporting and stuff like that.
I was actually more writing about music before I started writing about design, but I got offered a sort of freelance gig writing design stories for Surface magazine, and I needed the money. So that's how I ended up doing this. It was just
All three of us have a similar story then, because we all started out as print journalists writing about design, and then when things got tough in the print side of things, we all moved into the online space.
yes.
And things have got tough all over again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, although you know what, frankly, I'd rather be doing anything digital right now than having the overhead of anything physical. Although I see that you just renewed your office lease, which I was very impressed by that. Jill and I had an office for Sight Unseen once, probably about, what was that, like 6 or 7 years ago? We had an office for 6 months, and I think we went in once. It didn't work for us. So
we're 35, 40 people in London, so we kind of need an office. But yeah, it's true. I went into the office yesterday to pick up an old laptop, coincidentally on the same day that we renewed the lease, and we did think about it long and hard that, you know, technically we don't need the office because we can function virtually like this.
yeah.
But there's an awful lot of reasons why an office is a really good thing for a company when you get to that kind of size. Also, the thing I didn't mention,
oh, go ahead.
the thing I didn't mention was that under the terms of our lease, we would have had to put the office back to how we found it.
Oh.
Didn't renew. So that was another big reason why we decided to keep it on, because we just weren't able to go and take everything out.
Yeah, that's a huge job. I mean, it's funny because the way you talk about the office is kind of in my mind the way we were talking about this digital fair situation of like, you know, physical versus virtual, like, you know, which one, you know, it's sort of the same conversation we've been having in our minds about like everything virtual versus physical lately. I feel like it's just.
And it's true, because when Dezeen first had the idea to do Virtual Design Festival, you two were one of the first other organizations that we spoke to. And for me, it was particularly important to involve other media platforms, because obviously architects and designers are finding things tough at the moment, but media brands are finding things really tough as well.
Yeah.
And you tell us the reason why we're having this conversation today, because every year, normally during ICF Fair in New York, you put on a show, right? And of course, the whole fair got cancelled, so that left you with a dilemma of what to do. So why don't you pick up the story from there of what you've done?
Yeah.
Pivoted that idea.
Well, maybe I'll tell the background of the show in general, and then Jill can tell how we got to where we are now this year. I mean, so the show began, we started Sight Unseen in 2009. And it's funny, Sight Unseen was meant to be a print magazine. When we first told everyone like, oh, we're starting a new project, originally we wanted to do a print magazine. And I think because this all happened so quickly, like we left our jobs so quickly and we started Sight Unseen, and I think we just felt overwhelmed by like having to come up with the money and the resources to make something print. So that's kind of why we did online, because our hearts were still with like, you know, a physical object. And then when we started Sight Unseen in 2009, in 2010 already we were like getting a little bit frustrated with the limitations of online media. I mean, that's not kind of the whole reason why we did it. The other reason why we started a show during Design Week was because we felt that there was something missing in terms of a platform for independent design studios, you know, people who weren't necessarily looking for the commercial experience of a huge trade fair, but, you know, wanted to show ideas or wanted to show in a like-minded context with other smaller studios. And that's why we started a fair in 2010. And it was also like this idea of Sight Unseen's online personality and online presence being, you know, brought into the physical space, and like really trying to show people, you know, where our heads were at and what our taste was, and kind of what, you know, the world of Sight Unseen, I guess. And I think people kind of sometimes, or at least back then, respond to that in a much more easy way when it's right in front of their faces in a room. So in 2010, we started the NoHo Design District, where we took over empty storefronts in the NoHo neighborhood and programmed in exhibitions and product launches by independent studios. And that went on until 2014, when we officially called the show Sight Unseen Offsite. And that's when we brought it under one roof. And from 2014 to 2018, we did, each year we did a show in a different space in New York City, where we had, you know, anywhere from, I don't really know the numbers at this point, 40 to 100 exhibitors launching new work with us. More, you know, the whole point of Offsite was to be this curated experience, whereas the average design fair is really like anyone who pays can get in, and then you walk in and it's this big mess of, you know, you have one like hip up and coming studio, and then you have one like, you know, kitchen oven mitt brand, or, you know, whatever it may be. I'm just exaggerating, but like you have a sort of mix of things that don't really make any sense together. And I think for us, the idea was really, how can we make that experience better for people and make it a place of discovery, where when you walk in the door, you know that you're going to see things that appeal to you in every corner, and the whole show is going to make sense cohesively and tell you something about contemporary design, as opposed to being just like a mishmash, because you can't just pay to get into our shows. You have to be evaluated, approved, or invited. So that's sort of always been the point of the show that we do each year. And Jill can kind of speak to why this whole online fair happened.
So we actually took a break last year. Just, I think personally, we just needed a little pause. And we were really excited to come back this year. And we, you know, the hardest part of our show, honestly, is always finding the venue, because we don't have a set place that we always set up shop. So we had the venue, we had everything ready to go. We'd already started curating the participants for this year. And that was, you know, January, February. And I think when you guys announced that Salone wasn't happening was when we started to get like a little bit nervous. That maybe this wasn't going to go off as planned. And, you know, at the beginning of lockdown, we were still trying to think about like whether we could still hold our show in May, and it could be like this sort of like coming out party for everyone where they could, you know, get together and sort of like recover from this experience. But I think we quickly realized that that wasn't going to happen. You know, and because we're used to presenting things in a digital format, we had a leg up, as the same way you guys do. But we did try to think about it like holistically, the same way we think about our fair. Like, what's it like for a visitor to come to the fair? What's it like for a designer to show their work? Like, what are the things that kind of like make our fair special, or any fair special? So, you know, we wanted to add things like audio clips where the designers could talk about their work that would maybe replicate the experience of talking to someone in their booth. And we added a shoppable element so that people could like spec the work on site, as it were. And just, you know, I think one of the biggest things is like the designers themselves have such a good time at our show because it forms such a like nice community. So we're doing a bunch of Instagram lives too, where they can talk to each other, or sort of give a little bit of background about their process or inspiration.
Yeah.
So it really is in a lot of ways, both the site come to life and the fair come to life online.
And I will say, just add one thing here, which is that like, I think for a little while we resisted the idea of doing an online fair. I mean, obviously it was an idea the minute we saw this might be going south in terms of the physical show. And we were kind of like, well, you know, if we can salvage it for October, like the designers are really going to need it. Like, you know, we were trying to think of like, how can we serve the people that need us right now? Because people kind of historically have relied on Sight Unseen for a certain kind of support. And we are always sort of conscious of that role. So I think we were like, well, you know, what if we do a fair now digitally, and then it doesn't make any sense to do it in October because everyone's already launched their new collections online and no one shows up. It just kind of felt like, how do we best, you know, support people? And then the more it became clear that there was no answer for the fall, like no one knows what's going to happen, I think that's when we were like, okay, we have to do something now because people are struggling now and people are, you know, worried about their businesses and the future of their businesses. And I think we just thought, at least this will be something that can bring them together right now and give them some visibility in a time when, you know, they're feeling kind of lost. I'm sure that's the same thought process that you guys had, Marcus.
What, when we launched Virtual Design Festival, you mean?
Yeah. What was your, was your thinking similar to what we're talking about, or?
Well, unlike you, we don't do shows usually.
Yeah.
We have done them in the past. So we don't have like a community of designers that we're kind of constantly in talking to and who we had expected to put on a platform for. But
Right.
we did have lots of brands getting in touch with us when it became clear that some of the big shows weren't going to happen. They were like, you know, can you help us? I mean, we've got, everything's ready to go. Maybe we can do something with you. So that was very much the trigger to us to offer them something. And also the other side of it, of the equation, was that lots of our business is based around fairs. So Milan, for example, we're filming every day with brands, we're doing talks. The advertising cycle is based around, a lot of it is based around brands launching products. So for us, it meant that there was a big hole in our business model. So we just thought, well, let's do an online one. It seemed like an obvious thing to do, but it also seemed like an obvious thing to do to invite people like you on board, because we knew that we couldn't do it all ourselves, and we also wanted to support as many different people as possible. So it felt like an opportunity for everyone to come together and do something experimental.
Yeah.
We didn't really know, as you all know from all the emails and the calls we were having back in the end of March, beginning of April, we didn't really know what we would do.
I mean,
but we
like
knew
flying by the seat of our pants is a good word for all of us at this moment.
I went through the email chain earlier today with you, and you were like, hang on, we've got some more questions about how it's going to be structured. And I'd be like, well, we're still trying to figure that out.
Wow.
But I know you've got you're going to show us some examples of the kind of work and the kind of designers that you represent. But first of all, are they all New Yorkers? Do you represent a geographical community? Do they have something in common in terms of the stage that they're at in their careers and the kind of work that they do? What is a Sight Unseen Offsite designer?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, this is a good point to bring up because when we do the show in real life, the physical show, we always have a few international designers. I mean, first of all, they come from all over the States. You know, that's the first thing. A lot of them do come from New York just because a lot of the designers in the States are in New York. There's also a lot in LA and some of the other cities here, but primarily New York would be like, you know, the center for design in the United States. But we do always have a few European exhibitors, and we always try to encourage that. But the interesting thing about this Offsite Online show is that it removed this barrier of shipping from the equation. So we have actually more international exhibitors in the online show than we would have in a physical show, because normally what happens is someone's interested in showing in New York and then they realize that to ship their work would cost a small fortune and they don't really have a framework for what to do once they've shown in the States. Like, they're hoping to get work or clients in the States, but they're never quite sure. So it's sort of a big investment to make without that network. So I think we ended up with more in this digital show. I think we would have liked to have even more than that, but I think that we didn't have a whole lot of time to kind of plan this and go out and recruit people. So I think it is what it is, but there actually are a lot of non-New Yorkers and non-Americans. I think Sight Unseen is definitely known as championing the US design scene. But our daily coverage goes way, way beyond that. It's all over the world. I think the only common denominator is probably that we have like a little bit more of a focus on independent studios, but an independent studio just means someone who is running their own studio, designing their own work, in many cases producing their own work, as opposed to like, licensing their designs strictly to brands that produce their stuff for them. And that can mean someone who's super established, or it can mean someone who's new. It's kind of across the board. So that's why we use the word independent studio generally to sort of delineate what we're doing, because it really can be anyone at any point of their career. And then, there are a few brands that we typically work with as well during Offsite, but that's an interesting relationship because I think brands who come to Sight Unseen wanting to be part of our show are generally interested in the context that they would be featured in. Maybe they're tired of doing big fairs where they're right next to again, an oven mitt brand, a bathroom brand, a brand of like, Baroque Louis the whatever inspired furniture. So I think they come to us because they want sort of to be seen in a certain light, and they want to associate themselves with sort of work that's more like-minded. I do think that, probably we work with fewer brands. Definitely than you guys do, but we are more of a niche company. We have a smaller audience than Dezeen does, and we kind of speak to like a very particular audience. And so I think some brands maybe don't kind of, either they don't see the value of that per se, or they, I don't know. It's just a different kind of feeling working with Sight Unseen. I think it's a very specific thing. And if you want that very specific thing, then you come and work with us.
And I know it only went live yesterday, the online show, but initially you were worried that if you did an online show, it might detract from the physical show if you managed to do the physical show. Yeah. And I would persuade you, look, do both. You can.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that now? And especially given that you've managed to attract more overseas designers, do you think that the online model is one that can work for you? Do you think that in the future you might do online and real world, or is it too early to tell? And so how do the designers feel about it? Was there a reluctance among designers to be involved in a virtual show, or were they like, that sounds great, I don't have to ship, it's cheaper?
I think everyone was like, that sounds great. Especially because right now there are like no other avenues really. But I don't know, we were talking about this yesterday actually, because now that we have this framework for an online show, it would kind of behoove us to use it again. So I could see in the future some sort of mesh between a physical show and a virtual show. And also in terms of like designers wondering if it's okay to do like a virtual show versus a physical show. This could be like a good time to talk about the fact that we tried to replicate the experience of an actual booth. So like when we do our physical show, Monica and I are very strict about how things are presented. This year we were like, okay, everyone has to have carpet, everyone has to have paint. And so when we pivoted to a virtual show, we offered the people the opportunity to hire a 3D renderer to place their pieces in context. And I think people were really excited about that. Like some people were saying, hey, this is like a huge gap in our marketing materials. We don't have the ability necessarily.
I'm going to share my screen right now, by the way, to show some of these renderings.
A lot of people were saying we don't have, like we would have to rent a house and hire a photographer and like do all this stuff to place things in situ. And this was kind of like an interesting way to consider it. And I know, I think everyone knows that like 3D rendered interiors are becoming more and more prevalent, especially like on social media. I think a lot of designers maybe hadn't thought about it before. And so I think this adds like a really interesting layer to the show. We're known for our imagery, even from the show, because we're also extremely strict about that. We always hire like the best photographer in New York, and you know, we want every image to be like, you know, able to stand on its own. So this was a good way to kind of replicate that experience.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually walk through a few of these renderings just so you guys can see like what, how this worked. So I would say that, Marcus, to speak to your question, like the only people who were really hesitant or couldn't participate in this virtual show were people who just like, because of COVID, did not have their presentations together or couldn't get it together in time because their production schedules interrupted. So this kind of rendering idea was a way to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, because people who didn't have time to finish their work, but you know, were planning to produce things, or people who didn't have time to photograph it or didn't have the means to photograph it during, you know, a pandemic. This allowed them to kind of bring their vision to life in a virtual show in a way, you know, that kind of substituted for some of that physical interaction. So
not only are the environments in which the objects are being placed virtual, but some of the products are virtual as well, are they? You didn't insist
exactly.
the product didn't have to be physically made yet.
Yeah, so we sort of had a little disclaimer on the show where it was like, yes, some of these projects are presented as 3D renderings, like the objects themselves, but we made sure that everything in the show that was presented as a 3D rendering was not just a concept. It was something that is going to be produced physically in the near future, like once, you know, things get back to normal. So that was our only stipulation with the 3D renderings, because we didn't want people to see, you know, works and be like, oh, these are fantasy works. You know, it's a fair. It's like things that will be real at some point soon. So there are a couple categories of the renderings. You know, we loosely interpret it as like, here, you know, create the booth or the photo shoot that you wouldn't have had. But people really kind of took it to the next level, and some of them created these like fantasy spaces, you know, where they would have done a photo shoot, you know, if they had unlimited budgets. So this is not, obviously not a booth rendering. This is like, you know, kind of if I could fly my team to Greece and do a photo shoot in Greece. People really like took this as an opportunity to showcase their work in like the ultimate dream way that they would have showcased it. So these are rugs by Tantuvi. And these are ceramics by B Zippy, and they're based in LA. So, you know, this was really like the chance for them to go full out on a non-existent photo shoot. So, and then this is a case where the designer did not have his work fabricated, and you know, the rendering was his way of showing the works that he intends to fabricate later. And this is more of a booth setup. So
did you think at any point of going beyond just static renderings towards, you know, immersive environments or VR or AR or anything like that? And
yes. I mean, that is my ultimate dream project. And I really wish we could have done that, but we did not have the time or the financial resources to sort of go all in with that. You know, if, for example, if next year we were forced to do a virtual show instead of a physical show, which I'm hoping will not be the case, you know, then we would sort of look at some of those technological tools, I would say.
We did a project in 2017 where we had like 8 rendered interiors that were meant to showcase like the artwork on the walls, because we were working with a brand that did sort of like emerging artists. And it was like probably one of the most successful booths we've ever done. So it is something we are always have in the back of our minds, but it is somewhat complicated logistically too.
Well, also at the physical show, people had, we had the VR headsets for them. So at home, you know, unless someone has a VR headset, you can't do a full VR experience. You can do like a 2D walkthrough of a room, but, you know, in the end, is that any you know, the resolution goes down. You know, you have more of a chance for like glitches, and I don't know, it's a little bit more complicated. So if you don't have a headset, I'm not sure if it's fully worth it. But I wanted to quickly talk about this project, which is interesting. This is a tile brand called Feel Tiles that was supposed to show with us in our physical show. And in the physical show, they were going to work with a design studio to create an immersive booth, where it wasn't just like a trade fair booth of like, here's a menu of our tiles, here's our book. You know, a lot of trade fair booths are just like meant solely to do business. They're not imaginative. And when this tile brand came to us, we said, okay, you know, let's do something beyond a trade fair booth. That's sort of what we do. How can you envision this in a more interesting way? So in the physical fair, they were going to do an artistic installation of their tile. So when we moved to virtual, they said, hey, let's still do the same concept of coming up with, you know, an artistic way of showcasing the tile. And so they worked with Stefano Giacomello, and he created these rendered fantasy rooms. I mean, the interesting thing about these rooms is that they're all using tile in a realistic way. So there's nothing you see here that can't like actually be done. Sorry about that. But still, you know, these are renderings that came out of Stefano's mind, you know, and he was envisioning these environments to be like really more interesting showcases for the tile than you would do in a normal room. So he created both the spaces themselves and the concepts for the spaces. So we really love this project because I think it just shows like what you know, what you should be doing in a design fair, which is kind of bringing a little bit more imagination and concept to your pieces and showing off your vision, not just your product. And also what the renderings added to the experience of the virtual show. So then here are just a few more designers. Like when this designer came to us, James Dieter, he only had photos of his lamps on a white background, which is not terribly evocative. I mean, you know, even if you're an interior designer, like if you see a product on a white background, you're like, I don't know what scale it is. I don't know how it looks in a space. I don't know, you know, like there's all these drawbacks to showing work that way. So then, you know, suddenly you create this environment and everything kind of makes sense. Like, oh, now I see how that impacts the space of a room or impacts, you know, the visuals of a room, like, or, you know, it's just a more comprehensive way to look at things. So this is Joris Poggioli out of Paris. And he was one who wanted to show in our physical fair and was struggling with the price of, you know, shipping a massive monolithic marble table to New York. So this was actually a real advantage for him to pivot to a virtual show. So
and this one, he has like a whole story behind it. Like he envisioned this, you know, Italian villa for like a 60s something dandy. And so he created, he didn't create the rendering himself. He worked with a studio, but he was like, okay, this is my concept of what I want this context for my work to be.
So did all of the designers work with the same 3D visualizer? Was it one person that did all of this?
No, we had kind of like a menu of a couple that we had brought into the project to like, if in case they wanted to use one of those, because we had pre-selected them and, you know, made it easier for our designers. But some of them had their own renderers that they worked with, like Jumbo, for example. I'm not sure if they did it themselves or worked with someone. Jill, do you remember? I don't know. But these guys created their own renderings. And again, like all of these pieces that you see are in production right now. They're just not finished yet. So.
And Monica, you said that seeing products on a white background is not terribly evocative, but actually that's the way that most products are presented online, isn't it? And maybe it's time for that to change a bit.
Well, I think in a perfect world you have both, because I think that the nice thing about a white background photo is that you can see the piece really clearly. So if you're like, hey, you know, I just want to make sure I can see it from every angle without any visual interference, it's great. But then if you're like, I don't understand what this piece does to a space, you know, like if you're creating a space, like an interior designer or an architect, like you need to understand that feeling that it gives, or that, you know, I don't know. So I definitely think, yeah, it is time to do both. I mean, and we always ask the people that we feature, like if they have, you know, nice environmental photos. And a lot of times it's people don't have the means to produce a shoot like this. I mean, look at this image that we're looking at right now. Like, do you know how much money it would cost to do this as a photograph? It would be, you know, a fortune. And, you know, most designers aren't able to do that. So, I mean, also this building probably could never exist in real life anyway, but.
I was going to say this, up till now, all of the renderings you've shown could be real spaces, but this is starting to suggest
Yeah.
fantasy.
This was a real fantasy space. That's why I'm saying it runs the gamut.
Yeah. It could be on Mars, or it could be in a world that doesn't exist. So it sort of allows you to take the idea of product into spaces that only can happen in the virtual world.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing in these images is really a window into the designer's vision. Like I said, like it's like some of these designers are minimalists. Some of them, you know, wanted to see, you know, crazy landscapes. It's really like it was a collaboration between the designer and the renderer that they worked with. You know, I think the designers gave a certain amount of direction, and then the renderers kind of took it the rest of the way. But it's, you know, these all represent like some sort of view into what the designer, you know, sees as their world.
The really fantasy one that we just saw is an interesting case, actually, because they had produced some of the works that they're debuting at Offsite earlier this year in like different materials or different colors. And they had produced those works specifically for like a rental house, like a shoppable rental house that they put together. So they already had the interior like piece of their visuals. So that, I think that's partly why they were like, hey, like, let's just do like the craziest thing we can possibly.
This actually was one of our favorite projects. This is by a Russian studio called Superform. And again, these pieces are all going to be physical pieces, but we just loved like his vision of these interiors is just so beautiful. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it was just, this was particularly successful for us. It's sort of like just in a minimal house, but it just looks, it's like a full vision, you know, and even the pieces represent like a full vision of what a room would be or what an interior would be. So I think this was kind of a standout for us. I mean, both in just the way he styled the renderings, but also the collection itself. So
I think someone who does renderings himself. So I think that sort of like 3D mentality also informs the aesthetic of his work to a certain extent.
When you asked me if it was okay if designers submitted renderings, I had no idea what you meant.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
So are all of the products in rendered backgrounds, or do you have some that are in real backgrounds or some that are against white backgrounds? Have you allowed people to use white backgrounds?
Yeah, we did. We have all three. Some of the designers were able to pull off a photo shoot with, you know, some sort of background. Some of them only gave us white background shots, but you know, we had a short amount of time to put this together, and in some cases the work, you know, was so good that we just you know, all you have is 3 white background shots, that's fine. Like, well, it's like the thing is that people don't understand sometimes that we talk so much about images and photography and how important it is, and you know, how much it really brings things to life for people, but in the end the quality of the design is always going to come first. Like we should emphasize that. Like if something is a really beautiful product, or you know, really interesting or really well done, like we'll still show it if it's just a white background photo, and vice versa. Like we won't show a really beautiful rendering that has a product that we, think is not great. So I think that that's definitely step 2. It's just a really important step 2.
And one of you mentioned just now that about next year, and you said that, we hope we can do a real world show, but are you sure? Because this is probably less work, less expense. I guess we don't know yet how successful it's going to be for the designers, but it could be that you've stumbled across something that is the future of design shows.
Well, here's a little secret. We're contractually obligated to do a show next year because of our event.
And because of your deposit, presumably.
Yep.
So we've already paid for next year, so that's good for our wallets. But yeah.
But that aside, though, what do you think is the future for design shows? Because design shows do require physical spaces. They do require cash deposits. They do require people to fly in and ship their work in and stay in hotels. And suddenly that whole world looks very vulnerable. And suddenly it also looks very kind of crazy, doesn't it? It's expensive, it's wasting resources, it's environmentally damaging. So what could happen? What could this mean for the future of design fairs?
I mean, I think it's hard because you have to think of it from all angles. Like, yes, it's hard to produce and it's hard to fly in your work, and that means it's not accessible for everyone, who can't afford to fly their work somewhere. And, that obviously is an issue, but there's also the side of people who are coming to the fair, and like, why are they coming? And they're coming for several reasons. One is which you can't see the quality of a piece unless you see it in person. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think that we all would love to see a world in which virtual conveniences are, people get used to them, just like personally speaking, like there's no stigma anymore around, oh, this is just a rendering or this is just a virtual piece. Like that's obviously that would help in many ways. But in the end, if you're, you have a huge budget and you're creating a space and you're an interior designer and you want to know if a chair is well made, like you can't necessarily see that from photos. And I think that that's a reason why we kind of hang on to the idea of a physical fair is like, I think seeing something in person, you can't really, in the end, you can't fully substitute for that. I mean, the question then just becomes like what is worth it? You know what I mean? Like, is it worth it to do this entire thing and to fly all over the world just for that? Like, I don't know, like could there be a situation in which you can order things to your house and then if it doesn't look good in person, you send it back? Like, I don't know, there's a lot of systems that aren't in place to support that. And that's kind of why a physical show still has relevance, because it really is unless you have a retail store that stocks your stuff, which, is that's another way of doing it. But then it's a whole other question of like paying rent every month. But yeah, I think there's still things that matter. I mean, I think also when you come to a physical show, like Jill said, it's that relationship building. Could we have a scenario in which people are communicating with the designer online? Yes, and that could be interesting. And we actually, we just read an article about the Frieze Fair, which actually the Frieze Fair in New York online did quite well, I think, financially. But, someone made the comment of like talking about like the live chat function, like how that would have been, that's like such a helpful element of like, okay, well, if I can talk to someone in a booth, maybe for 4 days of the virtual fair, I can talk to, the person running. I mean, in our case, it's a designer, in their case, it's a gallerist, but there are ways to get it closer. But I think a physical show, like, we'll just always have a place in our hearts for that. I mean, also it's a social gathering, it's a community gathering. You know what I mean? Milan is not just about seeing objects. Like, you can do that. Yeah, you can do that from a website, but it's like you go there and you meet people and you see your friends and you take meetings, and there's all these things that happen around a fair that give it value beyond just seeing the work. So I don't know. I mean, I think we'll see what happens after the show. We'll see how the designers feel about it. If we had a show in May and no one signed up, then I guess we'd have our answer. Like, But I think people are still craving that physical interaction. I mean, I think Jill and I think there's a general feeling in the world right now, especially when it comes to art fairs, that there are too many and that it's too much to keep up with, and that it's too much expense for the galleries and stuff. So I think that I think people are kind of hoping that there'll be a little bit of like a culling. I don't think that's as much of a problem in the design fair world, but you know, maybe it's just like fewer and better.
And the thing about design shows being a social occasion, I mean, that's in the end one of the key reasons why we decided to keep our office, because I think people do need to come together, not to work as it turns out, but to kind of pick up on gossip and share ideas and meet new members of the team. It's kind of, it's not technical functional reasons. It's more like social and abstract and serendipitous reasons why.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I was joking that, you know, in the lead up to a fair, all we do with the designers is like send them emails being like, we need this, we need this, we need this, we need this. And sometimes I feel like the fair is like this opportunity where I can be like, actually, I love your work. And I'm like so proud of everything everyone has done. And I don't want to just bark orders at you for 3 months straight, but because we have to stay organized, like that's how it is. So that's like the piece that's really missing for me. Is like, if it was really great to launch it and it's had an amazing response, but it's somewhat anticlimactic to just be sitting here at my dining room table reading.
Yeah, we don't get to have a party. We don't get to get drunk with everyone and reminisce, you know, unless we had some sort of like open Zoom festivities.
Oh, maybe that's the next challenge to work on then. So just for everyone who's watching, tell us where they can find your online show. What's the URL, or what do they search for?
Yeah, so that's actually a good thing to mention. So, you know, obviously, in addition to finding it on the virtual design fair, you can go to sightUnseen.com. And every day on sightUnseen.com for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be featuring like more in-depth a project a day. So you can always find it there, but then on sightUnseen.com in the nav bar, there is a button that says Offsite. And if you just click there, you'll go directly to the Offsite show itself. So the Offsite show is fully launched, but then the coverage will come continuously for the next couple of weeks, both on Instagram and on the site, and in our Instagram live. So
and on the site,
always.
There's just like a little Offsite button at the top. That'll take you to the whole fair, and we've separated it into people who are launching like a full collection, and then further down the page is people who are just launching 1 or 2 items that are usually part of our real life section called Offsite Selects.
Great. Well, best of luck with it, and it's been great to collaborate with you and share your thoughts on fairs. By the way, our thing is called Virtual Design Festival, Monica.
Oh, sorry.
Got it wrong in your newsletter.
Virtual Design Festival. and I should know that because I know how important it is to you guys that it be a festival with all different, you know, types of.
Exactly. Yeah. We were very conscious of not being accused. Well, we were accused of being like aggressively commercial. So that was why it's been so important to include lots of cultural activity. We've ended up including like 4 times more cultural activity than commercial activity. But, well.
That's great. I mean, we actually didn't end up talking about building community, and I feel like that's an important way to do it. I mean, I feel our Instagram lives that we've been doing every day, people are just like, we're so glad you're here. Like, it feels like this moment when we're connected to people as opposed to just like sitting by ourselves, you know? So I think that community building is really important, especially, you know, I think, I really think for a designer to try to launch their own stuff in a time like this is great. I mean, there's so many avenues to do that these days, but to build a community around it, I think is just like so much more rewarding for everyone involved.
Well, like I said, good luck with it, and let us know how it goes. And great to see you, and hopefully we'll see you again in the real world before too long.
Yeah, I hope so. Nice to see you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.